Hey everybody, I just want to talk really quickly about the things you're making, the templates, and then the parts you're making for a body, a rim, and a foot, right? A body, rim, or neck, and a foot. You're making these compositions and you're starting out with templates, and then you're going to build them actually in clay. But how are you going to compose them? You're making a composition. That is a composition. And that is a composition. These are just two examples, and you're going to come up with your own, and you're going to add to that also the elements that are not here. What do you think? The handles, and maybe even a lid, maybe a sculpture on top, and then also what's going to be the imagery on the outside. There's going to be all kinds of stuff, maybe something going on out here that you're going to add to it. Well, here's what you're going to think about how all that is going to fit together, and that is this concept of organizing variables, right? How do you organize all those parts? And you do it with a sense of balance, woo, movement, emphasis, repetition, and transition. And we're going to look up there and see. But balance is symmetry or asymmetry, right? Or radial balance, right? And movement is some kind of gesture, some kind of sense of something's moving from here to there. Even if it's a 3D object, is obviously not moving. Emphasis, a synonym for that is focal point. Repetition, a symbol for that is pattern or something that repeats. And then transition, what? Repetition, just so you know, repetition is my favorite. I think it's the one that makes or breaks most compositions. You can have a whole bunch of cool parts and they're badly put together. We'll talk about it in a minute. But anyways, balance is the overall sense of how this thing holds together and what the ratios between all the parts are. And you're going to come up with your own sense of what that feels right. Movement, maybe these parts are not perfectly up and down. Maybe they move around a little and have a sense of tipping or swaying intentionally, dramatically, right? You know, have a little bit of a gesture to them. That's perfectly fine. Okay, that could be part of it. Emphasis is going to be what part of this is the focal point, the part that your eye naturally goes to. And in this one here, I think your eye naturally is going to go to this because it's the largest piece. It has the most surface area and mass. And this is smaller and it holds it up. And then this, you know, is kind of elegant and goes up. But that's the main part you see. Now that could change depending on dramatic handles. That could be the focal point. Or maybe if you have just a really amazing like imagery here, that could be what is the focal point. It depends, you know. All right, same thing here. Here it's kind of a toss-up. You have this really tall neck, but you also have this fairly huge foot. So it's kind of evenly distributed, even though the space is much bigger here. The mass is about as big there, but that's a big foot and this nice little element here, this little ball on the end. So it's hard to say right now what the actual focal point is of this composition. It might have to do with how you finish something like that, all right? So lastly, we'll talk about this one here, transition. What? And to me, here's the idea of transition. I had a professor once, fairly, you know, famous guy, and he just stuck up his finger and he goes, everything you need to know about organic form and everything you know about transition is on your finger. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, look how your finger goes down to this joint. And it then transitions down to this other, and it transitions down to this other. And within that context, look how everything whoop, fits together, right? And there's a transition from one form to another, to another, to another, right? And that's as far as organic form goes. Well, look at this, and you'll see that you have this shape here that comes here, and there's a transition between this form and that form. And there's a transition between this form and that form. And how cleanly that does and how much sense it makes, what kind of logic there is to it. And the logic is created here by repetition because there are these bands. There's a band here, which is repeated up here, and that repetition and the band of the very foot create a kind of a framing top and bottom that makes this composition sort of make a certain amount of sense, right? Here you have transition that you come up from here and there's a transition to this ball shape, right? And this ball shape to me echoes the shoulder here, right? And then this is quite a different shape entirely, but it adds variety and interest to the composition because it's kind of not like the rest of it. And little highlights, little highlights within this composition, which might even cause, I would probably say the focal point for me is right in here. I think that's just really handsome, how these handles fit in with the whole thing, right? So anyways, there's your idea of how you organize something. Organizing variables that create a composition. Not only in a pot, as you see here, but in compositions in painting, compositions in dance, compositions in music, compositions in literature. It all has to do with very much these same ideas of balance, movement, emphasis, repetition, and transition. Boop, boop. Goodbye.